Angelica, what's the smallest town you've ever lived in?
I think probably my what I consider my hometown. Um, it's maybe 35,000 people.
Okay, but it's part of a larger metro area, correct?
It's like an hour north of Boston,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's pretty small. I think at one point was the smallest city in Massachusetts.
Oh, really? There's no
Yeah.
town in Massachusetts smaller than 35,000
No,
people?
they split it up towns and cities.
Ah,
Do you know what I
that's
mean?
no, I mean, I've never
Yeah.
heard of that before.
Yeah, so it was the smallest considered a city in Massachusetts, and I don't know what size it is still now. I mean, this is when we moved there. So I was born and raised in a relatively big city in Massachusetts, and then we moved to Concord, Massachusetts, and then Newburyport, where I was through high school and college, and my mom still lives in that area, right in that area now. So that's why I say where I'm from. But I think that's the smallest place I've lived. What about you?
Well, when I was a kid in South Dakota, I only lived in small towns. So I first lived in a town called Garrettson, which has maybe 3,000 people in it. And then we moved
Wow.
to an even smaller town called Mission Hill, which only had about 300 people in it. So I actually attended school 1st grade through 4th grade in a literally a two-bedroom, 2-room schoolhouse with 25 kids in the whole school. So my class was the biggest, we had 5 kids.
Wow. This is like Little House on the Prairie shit.
Well, literally, because it's South Dakota, which is where Little
Yeah.
House on the Prairie was. That was Nebraska, actually, I think, but it's very similar. Yeah, yeah. We only had 1 paved road in our whole town. It was, the main road through town was a highway. That was the only paved
Wow.
road. Everything else was gravel. So, I thought it was fascinating. We're talking about a movie today that takes place in rural Iowa, and it's exactly like the
Huh.
place I grew up, or until I was in 4th grade. And then I moved to Gresham, which is a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and it was a huge culture shock. It was totally different than anything I'd ever seen.
Interesting. Yeah, I think Little House is in Minnesota, even closer, right?
I don't
To
know. I thought it was
uh,
Nebraska. What do I know?
yeah, I was wrong. My hometown population is 18,000, and I lived in Concord, which is 17,000. So I'm corrected. 17,000 people, which seemed pretty small town to me. Compared to like Boston or Lowell, where I was born.
Mhm.
Did you I mean, are your memories of living in such a small town good? You were pretty little.
I mean, there were good memories and bad memories. It's weird because, as a kid, there's no, like, value judgment on the town. That's my
Yeah.
reality. But I do have weird memories, like, there was only 4 or 5 kids in town. The rest were all farm kids who lived around town. So, like, in town, there's only 3 or 4 other kids, and one of them was a bully, and so I have these really distinct memories of him bullying all the kids, not just me, but, like, everybody, including some time I was playing on my front yard, and his parents he was like a 4th grader, a 5th grader, his parents gave him a dirt bike, like a motorcycle, and he came within, like, a foot of running over my head in my front yard because he was terrorizing us, like, he was a horrible seed. And, like, that's some really strong memories I have of that, or, like, trying to walk from my house to school or walk to the grain elevator because they sold sodas there, but avoid anywhere that I might run into him because, and our parents this is a totally different era. Our parents were at work or doing whatever. It was just
Yeah,
Lord of
and
the
you're on your
Flies.
own with yeah, they were just like, "Deal with it." You're on your own with those
Yeah.
situations.
From 3 PM to 6 PM, it was just like a lawless Wild West town, you know what I mean? Avoid Richard Huber at all costs.
He was like your Nellie Olson,
Yeah, he had
which
us.
Walnut Grove, Minnesota, Nellie Olson.
Huh.
Um, yeah, I don't I get really kind of nostalgic for small towns when I go on vacation and visit home. And, you romanticize when you're on vacation because it's so nice and it's so different from where I live now. But then I find if I'm there like 10 or more days, I'm like, this is really small.
Yeah.
We've gone to the same restaurant several times. I miss Portland. I miss, being in a city where you can just do new things all year, no repeats.
Well, and then there's also the people factor, I was talking about the bully thing, it's like, I'm sure you experience this, everybody knows everybody, for better or worse, like, there's some cool small town stuff where people support each other, but they're also so hard on each other.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some people from high school I wouldn't mind running into now and then, but others you're like, "Oh god." There's a really good chance at the grocery store you're gonna see 3 or 4 people you know, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but Maria Bamford has a fantastic routine where she talks about running into a bully of hers at high school who then continues to bully her in their adult interaction, and the punchline to the joke is she's at Target when this happens. The punchline of the joke is the other girl says cash or credit because this girl who's done nothing with her life is still bullying Maria Bamford, who's a very successful comedian. It's just like how it never changes in a way, you know?
It's true. They peaked in high school for sure. Welcome to Film Swap, the podcast where we challenge each other to watch the movies that we've let slip through the cracks or purposely shoved into the cracks for whatever reasons. I'm Angelica Thornton.
And I'm Nick Voll. Today we are watching and talking about the Bridges of Madison County.
There are images that lie within my heart. Images with the power to recall the warmth of a summer's night. The stillness before a storm. Reminding me of the first time I ever saw him. You go. When he stopped and asked directions to Rosamond Bridge. A moment when there was nowhere else to go. Except towards love.
Warner Brothers presents the most passionately read love story of our time. Clint Eastwood, Meryl Streep, The Bridges of Madison County.
The Bridges of Madison County is a 1995 romantic drama directed by and starring Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep. It's based on a 1992 novel by Robert James Waller. The screenplay was directed by Richard LaGravenese. I don't know how to say his last name. Should have looked that up.
That's good.
Good enough. The film
He's a
is set
writer. Who gives a shit?
yeah, exactly. Exactly. The film is set in 1965 in Iowa. Meryl Streep plays Francesca, an Italian war bride who lives with her farmer husband and 2 teenagers on their farm. The rest of the family goes to the Iowa State Fair, and Francesca meets a National Geographic photographer, Robert Kincaid, played by Clint Eastwood. He gets lost and stops at her farm for directions as he's looking for some historic covered bridges to photograph. One thing leads to another, and they have a very intense 4-day love affair. At the end of the week, Francesca has an excruciating decision to make: run away with the man who is clearly her soulmate, or stay with her family to protect her kids and her husband, who's a good guy but doesn't really rev her engine anymore. She chooses to remain with her family. Years later, when her husband dies, she looks for Robert. She eventually learns that he died a few years after her husband and left his belongings to her. His ashes were scattered from the Rosamond Bridge. We look back at this affair through the eyes of her son and daughter as adults who learn about it after she dies, and they're settling her estate, and they discover her journals. They don't understand why she wants to be cremated and have her ashes also scattered from Rosamond Covered Bridge. And then they uncover why, and we're along for that journey. Streep was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars for this film. I know you hadn't seen it, and Marissa wanted to watch it. Is this just something you were just kind of, it just kind of fell through the cracks, or were you waiting for a special occasion to watch The Bridges of
Yeah, I
Madison
was.
County?
I was waiting for its 50th anniversary. No, no, I mean, it came out in 1995. I was a junior in high school, and there's no way in hell you would have gotten 17-year-old me to watch this movie. It's just not for teenagers, obviously. So that's why. And then, it passed, and I part of it is because it was such a huge pop culture phenomenon. The book and the movie were just enormous, but it was also like the whole thing seems so corny and romance novelish that I never wanted to watch it. But I will say that, and we'll get into this, my expectations were not reality, which was good. I mean, I enjoyed this movie. Um, it's still not 100% for me, but I appreciated and enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. I've watched this movie a couple times. I can't remember the first time I watched it. I don't think it was even close to 1995, and I don't remember why, but I have watched it, and this is one of those movies where if I'm in the right mood and it's on, I will leave it on if I'm flipping through the channels and I see it. Um, this is the first time I've watched it as a woman in my late 40s, and I was surprised by how much I appreciated the maturity of the film, like, literally the maturity of the characters, seeing a woman my age. She was actually a few years younger than me when they filmed this. Meryl Streep was. I think she was supposed to be around my age. I'm 49 now. Um, and it was great to see a love story between 2 older people, a woman who's barefaced and beautiful and natural. So that was kind of refreshing because everything now is so filtered and everyone is so perfect. Even when you watch films portraying older women and men, they're just so perfect. Like all the Diane Keaton movies. I mean, Diane Keaton's great. She's always herself, but she still looks so perfectly airbrushed and perfectly styled in all those movies. You know what I'm talking about when she has a house in the Hamptons and everything's so perfect. So it was kind of nice to see this because I felt like it was more raw and more realistic. I love this movie. I think the acting is great. Um, and it really, watching it again, it underscores how special I think Meryl Streep is. I think she's got great chemistry with Clint Eastwood. This is just one of those films that I just watch, and then I think about that night, and I think about when I wake up the next morning, and I think that's a sign of a good film.
No, I agree. Well, first off, before anything, happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, it was last week, right?
Yeah, it
What
was. I'm 49. I've one year left until the big 50, and this is the first time that I really don't care.
nice.
I'm sorta like, "Whatever, age is age." So thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope you had fun. I know you had some champagne and pizza, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I had to work on my birthday, but then I came home and had half a bottle of champagne, so that was kinda cool. Still trying to figure out what to do next year. I have a year to plan it.
Yeah, you should throw a big party.
I do not wanna be on US soil for my 50th birthday. I wanna go somewhere big, but I haven't decided where that's gonna be yet.
Well, if you throw a party in town, I'll come. If not, I won't.
For sure.
For the movie here. Sorry, I kind of derailed us here, but yeah, there's so you touched on so many topics here, but I'll start with Meryl Streep. This movie doesn't work at all if anyone else is this character. I mean, I read originally you're talking about Isabella Rossellini, and she would have been great, I'm sure, but Meryl Streep elevates this movie so much. You like her, you empathize with her, and let's be honest, she's fine as hell in this movie. Like
She's gorgeous.
this is her like this is the most attractive I've ever found her in a movie, and it's maybe that's because I'm getting old too, and she's like my age in this
Mhm.
movie. But like, yeah, so I think none of this works without her. Clint Eastwood is fine. I think he's way too old for this character. Like, I get that he's supposed to be a little older than her, but he's 76 years old or something. It's a little weird. But he's good in it. I just that threw me just a smidge. But I guess I always think it's kind of weird when I see in films these gigantic age gaps. So
Yeah.
that, that's something. But
Yeah, he must have been at least I think well, he had to have been in his 60s when they filmed this in the early 90s
let me see. I thought it
because
was
he's in
he
his
was in his
90s
70s, but
now.
he was
Well,
born
he
in
that would make
1930, so he was 65 when they made this.
yeah, and she's supposed to be mid-40s probably. I think he's supposed to be in the 50s in the film, even though Clint Eastwood was in his 60s at the time, which makes it a little bit more believable, but it's hard because we know how old Clint Eastwood is.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I
he was
think in 1995, people did look older. So he could pass for a 55-year-old back then. I mean, look at the dad in A Christmas Story. I
yeah.
think he's supposed to be in his early 40s and he looks 70.
Well, yeah, and, like, he's believable and likable, and I did like that we get a side of Clint we don't get in most movies, that he was so and I have a feeling it's closer to his real life, personality, just a more sensitive and soft-spoken guy, and I appreciated one of the things I very much appreciated about this movie is it presented this image of masculinity that isn't macho in any way, shape, or form. Like, the dude was absolutely like manly as hell, but he wasn't cruel. He was very sensitive. You know what I mean? He was just an open book, and I think that's a great thing to put on screen because you don't see it that often.
I mean, like, anyone's gonna fall in love with his character. You're right, he had the perfect balance of masculinity, sensitivity. When he stops and he opens up to her when they're just talking in the kitchen, or he says, "We're not doing anything wrong," or when he's hurt, when they're getting into an argument, you can tell she was kinda lashing out at him, and he says, "This isn't fair." He says it with such sensitivity that your, like, heart just melts. He
Mhm.
played that so perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely, and I it's cool to see, and I think maybe that's a function of what you were talking about. This is a mature love story. These are adults. They're not youngsters in love. They are, you know, people who've been through some stuff and have a little more perspective, and it was interesting to see, and I think there's so many elements of this film that could have been incredibly corny or cheesy, but the earnestness with which Eastwood directs it and they act it make it human and believable.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be way better, way, way better than the book. I haven't read the book and I probably never will because the reviews that I've read are just awful and it is very corny and people were shocked that he elevated this story to the level that he did. And I think that was editing.
Well, yeah, yeah, absolutely, like, editing in the writing process, not the film editing,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, it's identifying the universal themes that are present, I'm guessing, in the book that are very clear in the film, and taking away schmaltz and
Mhm.
corniness, and it's just about 2 people. The one thing that I would criticize about the writing is I absolutely hate the framing device. I don't give a damn about her kids, and I actively hate her son, Michael, like, he's an asshole, and he's supposed to be redeemed at the end because he goes to his wife after being MIA overnight and says, "Oh, I want to treat you better." It's like that's no, that's sort of almost the opposite of what we're seeing in the rest of the film. You know what I mean? This idea that you can just be a better person or like not be an asshole or I don't know. He's a
I
bad spouse.
agree. I agree with everything you just said. It stood out to me so much. In fact, I texted you and said I forgot how bad the beginning of this movie is. The
Mhm.
framing device of this film is bad. The whole beginning of the film with her kids, I thought the acting was bad too. I mean, it was like this bizarre, like lifetime movie from the 90s kind of acting, especially with her son. Hated his character, he
Mhm.
sucked, and I didn't like the ending with the kids either. I just it just seemed contrived and corny, and such a stark contrast to the genuine dialogue and the pacing when we go back to the '60s and the level of acting. It was just too much.
It's 2 different movies. It's a sensitive, nuanced drama about 2 adults falling in love and having this moment, and then it's an after-school special with the kids like, "Oh, mom's boning, that's disgusting," which obviously it would be, but like and then "Oh, I'm a different person." It just didn't make any sense, and you didn't need it. That's the crazy thing to me. You don't need it. You just need these 2 people, and that's all you need. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that I think obviously Clint Eastwood is such a good director. I'm surprised he let first of all, I'm surprised these 2 were cast in those roles, particularly the male actor, I don't remember his name. But how did they let that slip through? Maybe they just thought the rest of the film would make up for it, but I don't know. I think had they framed it a little differently, this film would be on a different level.
Mhm. I agree. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes, and if they slice out that half hour with the kids, it's a perfect hour 45 of really intriguing, moving story.
Yeah. So one of the things I also noticed watching it this time as someone who's been married, 17 years and, I've never gone through this experience, fortunately, but it's really tough to portray infidelity if you're whether it's a novel or a film. It is easier if the woman is the cheater, like in this case with Francesca, but it's still really tough. And I think this job did an incre this film did an incredible job of illustrating how marriages become stale. Maybe it was a mistake marriage. Maybe she just wanted to leave Italy, like she said, and get to America. But the people involved still cared for each other. There's no villain here. It's basically Francesca's pull of wanting this bigger life, more passion. It's irresistible. It happens. It makes the case for infidelity, which is
Well,
really hard.
I mean, Dan Savage, if are you familiar with Savage Love, Dan Savage? He talks about this sometimes. He's an advice columnist, a famous one,
Yeah.
and just talks about how in some marriages, this is the sort of thing that has to happen to save marriages. I mean, I'm not agreeing with him necessarily, but you see the pull. You mean you see like, I mean, anybody who's been married a long time knows it's not the same at year 20 as it is at year 1, but that doesn't mean like love isn't there. And also like her situation is so unique with the war bride. You know, you don't know whether she just wasn't he was a nice guy that she wanted to escape with and that's it, or if she ever did feel any kind of passion or love for him, real, deep love. And so that
Yeah.
to me adds a lot of like nuance to the film because it's not so simple. She's not just a bored housewife. She's somebody who was taken
Yeah.
away from the opportunities that she wanted to have in her own life that she sacrificed to escape Italy.
Yeah, for stability. He provided stability and love, but a different kind of love. Esther Perel, do you know who she is? Do you know who Esther Perel is?
No, no.
She's like a pretty famous therapist now, and she's written a couple books and she does TED Talks. She's awesome. She talks about marriage mostly, but also just, interpersonal relationships. And she has done a ton on marriages that survive infidelity and how they're stronger after this. And this would be one of those perfect cases. Although I don't think this happened to Francesca. I'm guessing that the memory through her entire life, I mean, they sort of allude to this, of this 4 days kept her going,
Mhm.
maybe kept her depression at bay. Who knows what would have happened had she not met Kincaid?
But I mean, I don't think she would have gone anywhere, but perhaps she would have been less engaged in her own life, certainly. I mean, it did make clear to her what her life was going to be. It seemed like it was sort of when she started seeing him that you could see her contemplating this, right? Who am I? Well, where is this going? What am I doing? And at least now she has some clarity. And I think, we talked about the framing device with the kids. I think they were trying obviously to have that echo with them. Seeing their mom's thing gives them clarity on what they want to do. Again, you don't need that, but you can see what they're going for here. And so I don't know.
Yeah, and of course, we talk about what you think about after this film. Well, the big question is, could um, Robert and Francesca's relationship sustain over time? Would it have turned into resentment on her part because of the guilt? I mean, how do you walk away from your family like that? I don't know. I have thought about this so much after watching it the last time, and I think as heartbreaking as it is, I mean, I cried when I watched this movie because I'm like, God, these two people belong together. Can you imagine spending the rest of your life thinking about those 4 days, thinking about this person who you are so connected to? He says we're no longer one person. Um, but also, if she had run away with him, she loves her kids and she loved her husband, and the guilt would have killed her, and it would have surely somehow damaged the relationship she had with Robert, and then maybe overshadowed the great 4 days they had. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it also, on the other hand, you spend a lifetime looking back on these 4 days and thinking, "That was my true love," and I just kind of slogged through the rest of my life and never saw him again.
Yeah. I mean, but they do show her when her husband is dying. I mean, she loves her husband too. I mean, it's complicated, and that's why the
Yeah,
movie works so well because it isn't so cut and dry. I mean,
yeah.
we recently watched for this podcast, we watched The Notebook. And The Notebook, when I was looking back at it, I'm like, it is trying so hard to be this movie, but with younger people. Except for, the framing of it. But The Notebook that tells the story and the
Mhm.
but I feel like what that movie lacks is some of the nuance that this one has with the characters and their life situations. That one's just more of a slapdash version of this, I guess. So that's one of the things I guess I appreciated about it. You can there's all these like But what about yes, but then but you know what I mean? You, like, can go back and forth with all your arguments with yourself and whether or not they're justified in doing
Yeah.
what they're doing and what you would do, and, you know,
It's
I
such an impossible decision, it really is.
and another thing that you really feel in this movie that makes it work is that, Clint Eastwood, for better or worse, is a slow director. His films are slow, they're longer, and sometimes they drag a little, but they always have room for that character development. It's conversations. You actually get to see them know each other. You actually get to feel that sexual tension build and build and build because you can tell that they're into each other and that this works. And so I think that's another thing that really works in this movie. It's like they're not telling us that these two people are into each other, they're showing us how it happens. And that's really important. And I think too the fact that it is only over 4 days gives them this space as opposed to something that would take place over a longer period of time where you just sort of, we meet yada yada yada, now we're in love, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I agree. I agree 100%. I was thinking, wow, this is only supposed to happen over a span of 4 days. It doesn't seem rushed. In fact, I feel like we've watched them connect over a lifetime, and that's why it's so heartbreaking to us when she is grabbing the door handle in the truck, and she just wants to get out so much, and she watches him drive away in the rain, and he takes off the pendant and he wraps it around his rear view mirror, and I just want to melt. And I'm like, how do we understand this connection so well when this film is only supposed to cover, not even a work week? That's really remarkable.
Yeah, that's great storytelling and great acting. I mean, they really sell it. I mean, it's a harder acting job for Meryl Streep than Clint Eastwood because she is the one with stakes, with something to lose. He's just a guy who kind of falls in love, but it's also smart of the movie to tell the movie from her perspective because she does have more of that push-pull kinda dynamic happening within herself. Yeah, and that scene where she's yanking the handle and or wanting to yank the handle, it's so well shot, and her eyes convey everything, and this is an aside, but I loved that he was the guy standing out in the rain, like, I feel like that's a flip. He was the vulnerable one, and, like, in most movies, it's the woman, and I thought that was kind of
Yeah.
a fascinating dynamic flip, as I feel like a lot of the times too, these movies are sort of told from the male perspective because the women don't have a lot of agency in these movies, and it's
Yeah.
very much flipped in this one, and I thought that was kind of a neat thing too. It's funny for a guy like Clint Eastwood whose entire career early on was built on machismo, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. He was incredible in this too. And I just I don't know. I'm thinking about all the physical acting that Meryl Streep did and how subtle it was when she would, like, touch her neck and her chest because she was so turned on by him, and it was so perfect because it wasn't cheesy, it was real, and just her facial expression, she is the queen, man. This is why Meryl Streep is who she is. She just knows the perfect tone at every turn.
Yeah, and it's crazy, she is famous for all those Oscar nominations, obviously, and wins, but, like,
Yeah.
she's so good that even a relatively minor movie like this, and I mean minor artistically,
Yeah.
she elevates so much. It's crazy to me. I mean, you think of her in the big movies she's in that are more like but in the small movies like this, she still can really elevate the material. I mean, I'm a big fan of her anyway, but this is one of my favorite performances of hers.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we watch, Out of Africa to see what you think, because that's another love story. Obviously, she was critically acclaimed for this one, but, she plays a much different kind of woman, but also just really great performance, so I'm gonna put that on the list. Um, you talked about the character development and just the dialogue between these 2 people. This is why I really want to watch the, Before Sunset trilogy.
Mhm.
Um, those films remind me of, the conversations that Robert and Francesca have in the kitchen, these long scenes with a lot of dialogue. So we gotta watch those because I really think you'll enjoy those.
Yeah, I'm open to them. I like everybody involved with them. I just it's one of those that have slipped through and I haven't
Time
seen,
consuming
so
too. Yeah, and I feel like when we do talk about those, we gotta watch all 3, so we gotta carve out some time for that.
yeah, we've been talking about it because I want you to see The Lord of the Rings, a totally separate
Yeah.
kind of movie, but you haven't seen it and it's very time
Right.
consuming as well. So
Yeah.
we got to figure out how to do trilogies because what are we going to do? Like a 2 hour podcast? I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. It's a lot to talk about. So, interesting. I did not know this. I checked out the Wikipedia page. They filmed this chronologically. Did you see that?
I did, yeah.
Clint Eastwood said it was important to do that because they were these two people getting to know each other in real life, just like, Francesca and Robert. And I thought that was cool. I always wonder how you can, I don't know, how you can create a film or perform as an actor when you're kind of jumping all over the place. That must be really difficult.
Yeah. Acting!
I guess, yeah. I just feel like it would be so much easier if you, like, stick with the storyline and develop as the characters do, but that costs too much money, I think.
Well, but I mean, that is one of the advantages just from a practical standpoint of this film. It's this movie takes place
R
in, like, 4 locations, most of it's in
Yeah.
that kitchen. So,
Yep.
y
Yeah.
you know, it's a low budget thing, you can take a little more time, and actually, I read too that they finished the film in, like, 40 days, and, like, that was 10 days ahead of schedule. So, I mean, that's the advantage. There's no special effects. There's no crazy crane shots. It's just a
Yeah.
straightforward it's almost a play on film.
Yeah.
Almost. And
Yeah.
not to its detriment either, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Because sometimes I do mean that in a negative way.
Yeah.
There's lots of movies
Yeah.
where I don't know, it felt very filmic. It was a very beautiful movie. Um, I mean, I having been to Iowa lots of times, like, it's prettier to me in on film than it is in real life, but, yeah, it was a beautiful film as well. It's just like a moving story.
Yeah. And it is 1965, so a lot has changed even in small towns.
Sure.
Um, what else didn't we talk about with
Well, one
this
of the
film?
things I liked in this movie as well is I liked at the end when she went and befriended Mrs. Redfield because this movie also in a way is providing sort of commentary on that lifestyle, right? You know, even Francesca's character talks about how, there's all this love and support, but it is a small town and you can't escape who you are or who people think you are. And so when she says, I don't care what these people say, I'm going to make friends with that poor lady. She's a human being just like me. I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, I don't know. I liked that. It just gave me some more depth to the movie too, because I don't know. It's rejecting this sort of inherent conservatism of small town life. And I like that. And then maybe that's because of where I grew up and everything. It seemed cool to me.
Yeah, I agree. I liked it too. You know, I didn't grow up necessarily in a small town like you did, but it's a small community. And everyone knew, the Greeks stick together and the immigrants stick together and everyone knows each other's business. And my parents got divorced, which never happened. Never happened. It was frowned upon. It didn't matter if there was abuse involved or, alcoholism. You stay together for the children and you stay together because you're not supposed to get divorced. And my mom did not do that. And there was talk, and it wasn't scandalous like an affair, but there was talk. And I remember at 5 years old, people talking about it. I went to a Greek Orthodox elementary school, and it was talked about. I didn't get invited to the McDonald's birthday party in kindergarten because I was, the child of divorced parents, and I was the only
Wow.
one in class who didn't get to go to that party. And it turned into a thing where my aunt wouldn't let her daughter go, my cousin, because she was so offended that this mother wouldn't invite me to the party. And it's such bullshit. So it is nice to see someone saying, F you, we're changing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's I don't know. I'm curious about the author of the original novel, Waller, who wrote the book. If this is his background, or if it's something he just has noticed, or it just seems like something that it's very inside. It seems like something, especially as relatively subtle as it was. I mean, the scene at the diner is not subtle, but I don't know. It doesn't also make a huge deal out of it either. It's just like I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of nuance to this movie, and nothing hits you over the head too hard, and I think that's good. It's what life is like, typically speaking.
Except for the kids, as in the 90s.
Yeah,
That
I
was,
don't
yeah.
even consider that part of the movie in a weird way. That's like its whole other
Yep,
thing. You know
exactly.
what I mean? I think
Yeah,
we can
that's
just
not the story. Yeah.
I think it's easy to just dismiss that. This might be one of those movies, like, I wish you could make a fan edit. Well, you can, but go in and just take all that crap out. You know what I mean? I think we talked about this before, the film Julia and Julie with Meryl Streep again as
Yes,
Julia Child, which
yes.
fantastic. She's wonderful in that movie. Well, the other half of that movie is Amy Adams' modern character blogging about it. Cut all of her shit out, and you've got a great 1-hour movie, and this reminds me of that same thing. Just cut anybody who's not Meryl Streep out of the movie, and you've got a great movie.
Yeah, I remember watching Amy Adams and thinking, "Am I supposed to feel bad that you just spent your whole paycheck on these ingredients because you have this weird goal you can't let go of when people have real problems in their life?" So, yeah, all of that out. That would
Out.
be great.
And I
Yeah.
love Amy Adams. I think she's fantastic,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's not a relatable character. Like, if you're
Yeah.
annoyed at one of the primary characters, that's not a great thing.
Yeah.
And
That's
actually,
tough.
that yeah. So, anyway, that just reminds me, there's a few movies like that where you just wish you could excise certain parts, like all of Jar Jar
Yeah,
Binks in the, first tr Star Wars prequel, but you've never seen those either, so what does it matter?
I've seen little bits and pieces. I wonder what Clint Eastwood would think of this now. I wonder if he would agree with us,
Hmm.
looking at this almost 30 years later.
I don't think I would wanna meet him and find out. I think he'd scare the shit out of me if I met Clint Eastwood.
You
I don't
think?
know.
I don't know. I mean, he's become more stubborn in certain ways in his old age, obviously his conservatism and everything else. But I also feel like through his films, he really mellowed out as the years went by.
Well, that's what's weird to me about, like, a conservative like him, not to get too deep into politics, but, I know lots of people, and some are very conservative and some aren't, and just sort of like there's this sensitivity and tenderness that one can have, and he seems to have it, but then that compassion and doesn't extend beyond certain parameters, I guess. So you can be, very conservative and not necessarily compassionate towards certain groups of people, but in every other respect, it's a strange flaw of human life. You know what I mean? That we all, I guess most of us, a lot of the times our empathy is confined to our group, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And it's fascinating to me that how a person can be like that. This I don't know what I
Yeah.
want you to do with that comment, but it's just something I was thinking
No,
about
I
with him
agree.
as I was watching the
Yeah.
movie. 'Cause
Yeah. I
he's
just, I I just liked how this film really relaxed him all around.
Mhm. Yeah, he did seem like somebody you would wanna hang out with and who had interesting things to say.
Yeah. And how someone in their 40s at the time in 1995 who watched this movie, someone like my mom would fall in love with this character of Robert Kincaid. He was
Mhm.
pretty damn hot. I don't care how old he looked in the movie, I mean, he was hot.
He was in great shape too. Did you see he took his shirt off and he looked like he was in
Yeah.
his 40s and not in his 60s.
And just everything he was into was attractive, right? Especially to someone like Francesca, as opposed to her just farmer husband, routine, good man, wants to provide, not necessarily someone she's gonna talk about philosophy and travel with. Robert's a reader, he's a farmer. I don't know. I mean, just she married the wrong guy, obviously.
He's been all over the world, and that is a stark contrast to her life experience at this point. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
so yeah, you definitely see the attraction for sure.
yeah.
What haven't we talked about? Is there anything else we've missed in this movie? Watch it,
No, I rec
I think is the
yeah,
thing.
what did
Watch it.
Marissa think? What did Marissa think?
So we waited to watch it so she could see it, and then she got too tired and went to bed halfway through.
That's such an Angelica move. It's why I have to watch movies in the middle of the afternoon now. I will fall asleep. I don't care how good a film is.
Well, your schedule's all over the map anyway, though,
It
so
is, but I also think that happens to me on vacation. I just find, like, snuggling up on the couch and watching a movie is just so cozy and just I mean, it's you just fall asleep. This is what you do in middle age. It's tough. You need some cocaine to get you going before you watch something like this.
sure,
Just kidding.
sure.
Cut
That
that out. I don't do cocaine.
sure, anymore. So, um, so I would recommend this to anybody. I think I would not recommend it to teenagers. I think you have to be an adult who has experienced something in your life to get all of this, even though I can see how, I teenagers might like it. I don't know, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like you're gonna get a lot more of this if you've had a lifetime of experience.
Absolutely. and that's why it hit different this time for me because I hadn't watched it in years and years.
Yeah. Well, are you ready for your challenge for next week?
Yes. Yeah, I'm excited. What are we watching?
We're watching Spinal Tap. This is Spinal Tap is the name of the movie, but it's one of my top 5 movies of all time. I think it's one of the funniest movies ever made. It is a movie that gets funnier the more times you watch it. It's a universe I can just sink into. If you like, Best in Show or Waiting for Guffman or any of those Christopher Guest movies, this is the precursor, starring him, but directed by Rob Reiner. I think it's an awesome, funny movie. It's a pop culture classic, and I can't wait to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed I haven't watched this, to be honest with you. It's, I love Christopher Guest. I love Fred Willard. I love Harry Shearer, Michael McKean. They're so good. So yeah, I'm excited to watch this.
Well, cool. We will see you next week. And as always, folks, we want to remind you, love actually sucks.
Were we supposed to do that together?
No, it's
Or have
impossible.
we given
We're
up on that?
We can't
Okay,
do it
we've
together.
given
We're
up. We given
the
up.
sync issues. Just like Laura Linney's character in Love Actually, we give up. Film Swap is produced and hosted by Angelica Thornton and Nick Voll. You can watch or listen on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Follow Angelica on Twitter at Angelica KATU and follow Nick at Nick Voll. Share your thoughts on the films we discussed there, and we might just read them on the show. Music by John Michael Farley and Nick Voll.